Hi everyone, Angela here. In this video, I'll show you how I make both a plain scrunchie and also a double layer one. Now with a double layer scrunchie, the top layer of fabric is sheer. So if you just sew it with an ordinary seam, you're going to see the raw edges through the fabric. And to me, that doesn't really look that nice. Even if you were to sew a French seam all along that outer edge, I still find it looks a bit untidy. So I'm going to show you how I do it so that you end up with a nice clean finish. For the plain scrunchie, I'm using a piece of soft satin measuring 5 inches by 28 inches, or about 13 centimeters by 71 centimeters. 10 inches of 1/4 inch wide elastic, my clover bodkin, some fabric clips, and my Japanese thread snippers. You can find links for all the tools I use in the description below. Begin by matching the short ends right sides together and stitch with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, back tacking at the start and finish. Now this next step is completely optional, but at the halfway mark, use your clippers to make little notches on each side. This will help you match your fabric edges. Next, open up the seam that you've just sewn and then flip the fabric over so that it's on the bottom. Lift the edges of the top layer and then roll it together so that it's nice and skinny. Next, bring the edges of the bottom layers together, matching at the seams. Start by back tacking about a 1/2 inch before the seam and then stitch with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Stitch towards you as far as you can, and then with the needle down, pull that center fabric towards you. Keep checking to make sure that you're not catching any of that center fabric while you're sewing the outer seam. The little notches should match when you've sewn around halfway, and as you get close to the start of the stitching again, you're going to have to leave a little opening to turn the scrunchie through. Leave the opening about 2 or 3 fingers wide, and back tack to finish. Insert one end of the elastic through the opening of the bodkin and pull it tight, and then thread it through the center of the scrunchie. Then take the end of the elastic out and remove the bodkin. With the ends of the elastic together, wrap it around your finger and tie a knot like you would on a balloon. Leave the ends of the elastic about 3/4 of an inch or 2 centimeters long. You can always tie that elastic looser or tighter. Use your finger to push the right side of the fabric through that opening and then pull the rest of the scrunchie right side out. Push the fabric of the opening to the inside. You can either slip stitch it by hand or you can edge stitch it along the fold to close it. If you choose to close it by hand, it's a much nicer finish. Just do a slip stitch or a ladder stitch with a single thread. For the double layer scrunchie, I'll be using the satin again for the inner layer, measuring 5 inches by 28 inches. And for the outer layer, I'm going to be using a polka dot organza measuring 7 inches by 28 inches. Organza is a lightweight sheer fabric that has some stiffness to it. You could also use chiffon for the outer layer. Sew the short ends of your inner layer together with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, right sides together, back tacking at the start and finish of your seam. Make sure you're sewing with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and not 1/2 an inch. If your fabric for the outer layer has a right and wrong side, place the short ends together with the wrong sides together. Stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back tacking at the start and finish. Next, trim off any loose threads from the fabric so that you have a nice clean edge. Turn the fabric over so it's right sides together, and then just pinch the seam so that it's right in the middle. Now stitch again with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance or 1 centimeter. This wider seam allowance is going to encase that raw edge, creating a nice French seam. At the halfway mark on both pieces, cut little notches on all 4 edges. Next, press the seam of the outer layer to one side and press the seam of the inner layer open. Flip both pieces of fabric so the right sides are out, and then slip the inner layer in between the outer layer. Match the seam and the notches and then clip around the outer edges. You have to make sure that both layers are exactly the same width around. If they're not, go back and adjust the seam of the inner layer. Once you've done one side, turn your fabric around, match your seam and notches again, and line up your outer edges while you push the excess fabric towards the center. Next, using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, you're going to stitch around both edges so that both layers of fabric are sewn together as one. If you're enjoying this video, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on all of your notifications. Now once that's all done, you're pretty much going to sew this scrunchie exactly like you did the first one. The only thing is you have that extra fabric from the top layer that you have to keep out of your way while you're sewing. Just keep checking often and keep pushing all that excess fabric towards the middle and away from the seams. Leave the same size opening and then install the elastic just like we did before. Turn it right side out and then close the opening either by hand or by machine. By stitching all those layers into that one seam, you don't have any ugly raw edges showing and you're left with a beautifully finished scrunchie. Thanks again for watching. Take care and happy sewing.